ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Scala Equestris podcast, your source for mounted combat, historical riding techniques, and horsemanship. I'm excited to introduce to you Arne Koets. For anyone who does not already know who he is, Arne is a classical dressage instructor traveling all over the world to teach clinics on both dressage and mounted combat. He's also an expert jouster, having ridden in numerous countries around the world as a part of various tournaments and historical reenactments. If this weren't enough, he is also the host of the yearly Rossfechten Symposium in Germany in the late spring and the Harnessfechten Symposium for armored combat in the fall. I'm bringing to you an in-person interview from the Rossfechten Symposium in May 2024, where I had a chance to ask Arne my questions in person. As usual, we start off with some rapid-fire question and answer. But Arne, whereabouts in the world are you?
Germany. So right about in the middle of Germany, I have a little nightly manor that I managed to secure for myself, where I base myself from and travel from and host people to events to my little corner of the world.
It's very kind of you to say nightly manor. I think we could call it a castle.
Technically, according to the Sachsenspiegel, it would legally be considered a castle in the Middle Ages in Germany. Yes, true.
So we're doing this podcast from your castle. Pretty cool. Secondly, how old were you when you learned to ride?
First time I sat on a horse, I was 21. I remember that like the year before I started squiring for a joust troop, and I came to first to put people's armors on, and then they needed help with the horse lines. So I went down there, and I distinctly remember asking somebody, "What is the front of the saddle?" I had not touched a horse until that day. So that is, I was 21 when I started riding.
I just love that fact because I think it shows then that there is no I'm too old to start, I'm too old to learn. If you're willing to put that time in, that effort in, it's something that is learnable even as an adult.
Yeah, and of course I was a fairly young adult, although I had very little background. But I know people who started jousting and riding for jousting 40s, and some others in their 60s.
That's impressive.
Yes, oh yes, and they managed to get to joust. And of course, by that point, it might be a bit harder to get to this higher level dressage stuff. Absolutely, it is going to be difficult, but it is possible. With sheer grim determination, it is possible.
Indeed. And so it sounds like you had more experience in medieval swordsmanship and other things before you became a rider.
Yes. I started off LARPing actually, and then I started off doing reenactments. And then when HEMA, well, before it was called HEMA, when HEMA became a thing in the late 90s, I picked that up and started trying to interpret sources myself. And then, that whole community grew up, and I initially was quite a part of that in the beginning, and then as the jousting took over, maybe people forgotten a bit more about me. But I've been doing that for 25 years or something, so not longer. It's more like 30.
Did you have interest in knights and castles and medieval things when you were a child, or was it later on that you developed the interest?
Now, that's the one thing I was always interested in is very generally military history, but in particular knights and things like that, and sword fighting, and of course a bit of fantasy films and stuff like that, and of course that led into Dungeons and Dragons. So when I was 5 or 6, I think, the original Dungeons and Dragons was being sold in Europe by Games Workshop, of all places. So there was like all these game, Wizard of the Coast and all that kind of stuff. The whole lot, all these games started coming in around that time, and I started doing Dungeons and Dragons when I was 6, and that kind of led to it all. It's like role playing to live role playing to reenactment to.
You're saying, no, I actually really want to do the thing in real life.
Yeah.
Very good. What is the most memorable experience you've had on a horse?
Oh God, that's tricky because there's a lot of very memorable, usually very scary things that have, of course, are memorable in that sense because they were just very spectacular. Well, mostly mishaps. However, I'd like to talk about the memorable experience when I suddenly felt very together with my horse, and I think that is really core to an equestrian's life. Is this moment where you really feel like all these superlatives, like a centaur. It sounds so cheesy, but where you really feel like I can put every hoof where I want it to go. That first time where every hair of that horse was part of me, and when it clicked how to get to that point, and I distinctly remember that this was in a club tourney, and where my gelding that I still have just just suddenly was so with me, but also I knew what he was seeing, and he just came up to me. He went like, "Okay, I get this game now. Now I'm gonna be this precisely controlled by you." He came to me, and this was such a huge thing for me to understand that the horse decides to come and make that connection to you, and then it becomes achievable once you understand that you just need to get the horse to be interested to do that. Then it became something I could just repeat. And then you can really just put your horse's hooves where you want him to go. And it's a bit like that Avatar moment in the film, where
Hmm.
they just plug in, you have the blue light, and you just do that because you like to. That was a big deal.
Yeah, that can take uh, a horse's lifetime of work in some cases to get there.
Sometimes, but
Yeah.
I think people sometimes make it too arcane. It is more doable than people say, and of course there's levels, but I get it pretty high level pretty quickly with a lot of horses actually, and I know a whole bunch of people that are genuinely getting to that point. Not all of them might admit it because it sounds so superlative, but it's actually something that it's really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. And last quick question. If you could go back in time and visit one historical horse person, who would it be?
It's very difficult. I want to say Grisona because I think he's the most misunderstood. So it would be the easiest to gather historical knowledge to the modern world. So it would maybe set the record straight the most. Would it be the one I would like to learn from most? Probably not. Then I'm more towards the Lapou maybe, or just good old Guérinière. I mean, it sounds so boring to say François Robuchon de la Guérinière, but he's pretty cool. Oh dear me. I suppose Grisona for the
Hmm.
historical benefit of the world, I should say.
Do you think he's more misunderstood than Boucher?
Yes, yes, oh yes, absolutely. I think Boucher is misunderstood, yes. Misunderstood in two directions. There's some people who would like to make him perhaps perfect in every way, even though, of course, he was just a human being, so it wasn't perfect. And people might even find things out on the basis of his work that Boucher might not have understood himself yet. So things lead to other things, like discourse leads on. And Grisona is very actively gotten a lot of bad press very early on in the 16th century. The English translations that even the Duke of Newcastle had a few hundred years later already gave him an extremely bad rep that was entirely undeserved. And he is part of a very old tradition and one of the earliest authors of a very old tradition that is actually at the basis of a lot of the different branches that we later determine. So much of it is the beginning or the beginning of the written bits of the
Hmm.
traditions. And he probably tells you very, very useful things, and people don't even read it properly because they all know in advance that he's so evil, which he isn't.
Right. They're coming to it with this preconceived notion, and sort of he has to prove himself just upon the read before they want to take any of it, seriously.
Yeah,
I agree.
and what he actually tells, that is the famous thing is the punishments. But he tells you to not use the punishments,
Right.
regardless of misunderstanding what that punishment actually is.
Similar to some of the bit books showing bits that they're saying, this is not the first, second, or third line we recommend, but here is a bit that
Yeah,
exists.
or even people will want you to make this but don't.
Hmm.
Literally, as an example of the thing a bit maker should not even make. This is in the bit books. Like, this is evil, don't use it. But it's to define the thing that is not good.
Right.
They are in the books. And that people don't even read the text because it's in handwriting. And then they don't understand what they're trying to convey.
Very good. So the first topic I wanted to specifically dive into with you is to talk a little bit about your experience jousting and doing group melees. What do you think is something that even horse people perhaps misunderstand about jousting at a high level?
Oh boy. Jousting at a high level means that your biomechanical connection from lance to rider to horse should be fairly simple. You're just cantering in a straight line, but it needs to work out really, really well. So, for instance, I think most people know that when jumping, you need to pace the horse so that it jumps just right over the jumps and over the obstacles. And of course, that horses can help you get that right. Some horses are more talented than others, and everybody knows that those strides are important. But jousting, this happens too, and that is, I think, something that people don't even realize. And then you have this biomechanical. You're literally hitting them with the tip of the lance, powered by the hind leg of the horse, and this is one fluid system, and that makes you understand in one rather simple canter stride how you affect projecting the force, the impulse of the hind leg exerting itself over the entire movement of the horse. Definition of schwung or impulsion. Well, this is the impulse of the hind leg exerting itself not only over the entire movement of the horse and rider, but also about the impact of the lance onto the target. So it's the epitome of schwung, the epitome of impulsion, really, if you get it right.
Mm-hmm. No, that make as someone who grew up doing jumping, that makes a lot of sense. That the same way you would plan your strides leading up to the jump and the timing of the takeoff, well, the moment of impact of your lance against the other rider, that's the jump per se, and then everything leading up to that needs to be correct, and the stride needs to be in the correct place at the time of impact.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Easier said than done.
Yes.
Um, Tell us a little bit about your setup for jousting for anyone who's not seen you joust, what type of helm you like to use and why.
Okay. I use different ones depending on the particular style we're using. Probably I'm by now most well known that I joust in a frogmouth helm. So not a ground bassinet with a frogmouth visor, but an actual frogmouth helm. So it's a steel bunker that looks like a prow of a ship, and it has the hood that is suspended inside it with leather straps, and is buckled in my case to my back plate and breastplate. So that is what I use for historical solid lance jousting. So where we actually use trees with steel sharp heads with a taper, because the tree is tapered, and so those are used also with an arête de cuirasse. So that's this whole system: your helmet, your breastplate, and that hook that the impact of the lance is transferred to. That's all one big unit and buckled together. So that's the one I use most. But if I joust in open field, so that's without a tilt rail, which I do on occasion, then I use a field helmet. And then I usually use a closed sallet. So that is, it looks like a sallet and bever, but it's actually a closed helmet. So the bever is attached to the sallet. So it's one helmet. And I have a fairly heavy duty one that I have done solid lance jousting open field in. And because it's heavy enough to just about get away with that. So I have done that as well, and that is more portable, more convenient. So, and if I get asked to do balsa jousting, then obviously I have a little bit more leeway, and it might be more convenient to have a visor you can open, can I be bothered? What do people want to see? What would be a good representation for the historical show that way for showing a historical scene of a specific joust, and what did they use, and I might want to use that particular equipment. So I pick and choose a little bit as a result.
Right. So just like fighting on foot, it's that combination, your personal sweet spot between safety and you could say sight, what you can see, uh, breathability, uh, or ability to even talk to your ground crew, depending, and finding that combination that makes you comfortable.
Yes, and in this case, of course, the actual force involved can vary by, I think, about an order of magnitude.
Mhm.
So it is a lot of force. So the numbers that we've actually measured, now famously, now we have a few numbers of longbow arrows as how much, 130 joules, which so in the last 10 years the estimated muzzle energy of a longbow has doubled. But yeah, we went from 60 to 130 joule. A lance impact is 300 joules and up, and well up from there. And one measurement in Germany claimed 4,000 joules. So that's like being shot in the face with a rifle. Now you might want half an inch of steel in front of your face.
I agree.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's a good idea.
How that's actually perfectly leads kind of into my next question. At the top level of jousting, so the what you think of as the highest quality jousting, maybe you've participated in the last 5 years. How close do you think we are to the real thing? Do you think we're still very far off, or you think we're getting there in some cases?
So the historical sort of lance jousting is a version that happened. So it's the same helmet, the same saddle, the same size of horse, the same conformation of horse. It is the same lance, or the same thickness, the same length, the same species of tree, with a comparable tree ring count, with a comparable dryness, with a comparable weight of cornel. With the cornel is the same sharpness. It is the same size. We're using steel grapers. We're using arrets. We're using shields that are made in the same way, that are the same weight. It's the same. Now, of one version of all the versions at the time. We kind of cherry picked one particular version because we're not as butch as they were. Because there's some ridiculously hardcore versions at the time, and we very deliberately did not replicate those because they seemed suicidal to us, and also they're frankly just more expensive, so we couldn't afford to do them. So historical solid lance jousting, I feel fairly confident to say is the same. When it talks to things like the Coleman Tourney that we do have, so that the group combat on horseback, um, we keep running into that we just don't have as many people. It was perfectly normal for Schaffhausen. There was 235 people that applied, and 197 were allowed on the field at the same time. You will never find that sort of number of riders that can do half canter pirouettes in armor one-handed for an hour on end in armor whilst beating each other up as a coordinated group. You'll never find that many in the world at the moment. We were very happy. I think we got up to about 12 or something. That's a lot.
That is a lot.
And so this density of that kind of amount is going to be something that we're definitely going to struggle to replicate. I mean, at one occasion, original tournament had 400 riders in it.
Right.
It's just ridiculously many.
Yeah, I think particularly the melee is something that I'd love to see more of done on a high level, and something that I think a lot of people don't really have the chance to experience. Even there, plenty of jousters don't really get to do that as a part of what they do. Looking at historical sources, you look at art depicting the melee, right? It just looks like complete chaos,
Yeah.
absolute chaos. What is it like to ride in one? Does it feel like that?
It's It's easy to compare it to fighter pilots. So if you compare it to, if you have seen like films like the Battle of Britain or something, like dogfights in First and Second World War, it is sort of akin to that in many, many ways. So it starts off with formations approaching one another, trying to jockey for position, and you run out of time very quickly. So this initial approach is extremely fast. It takes very little time, and then the moment those two formations hit, you start hitting each other with your clubs, and then all these formations, just blast off each other like pebbles on a window in random places, and then you're constantly in this very maneuverable, constantly changing environment, and then you get to deal with this if you know your sort of principles of how to deal with this extremely complex fight. Very similar to the Dictabulka, actually. Um, there is these rules like keep changing your opponents. Don't stare yourself down on one because somebody's going to get behind you and screw you over. And things like that. Be aware of the hun from the sun, sort of thing. Well, we do that in melees. Well, if you have the sun in your back, you can use that, and it's remarkably much the same as a dogfight, just on a horse in armor with a club. And of course, you can parry, which is nice. So it's very tiring, and the main thing is heat management and breath management is usually what actually takes people out. You get bashed 1,500 times, but what stops you in the end is that you just are blacking out.
A little bit, in some ways, I hate to say it, but similar to some of the combat sports that have developed in armor, in the sense of you go until you just simply cannot go anymore.
Well, what they say at the time was the gentleman should keep fighting until the ladies have seen enough.
Mm-hmm. And only the ladies know when they have seen enough.
Yes, exactly. So you just keep bashing until somebody blows a trumpet and you're allowed to stop.
Very good. Any opportunities to see you joust this summer? Any events that you're doing that you want to share?
Yeah, so I'm doing slightly more again. It's starting to pick up again, which wasn't really a decision I made. It's just starting to happen to me again. And so we're actually going to the Archeon of all places in the Netherlands in just about a week. And so that's during Hemelvaart, whatever that's called in English. And that is a very small show in a theme park where I once started that whole procedure, that whole program of the joust shows that they do there. And we're trying out a few new horse, a new jouster, and just doing a nice little show, which is like from one of the smallest. And then some of the other things we're doing a very, very nice show with a similar group of people in Denmark, the Nyborg Joust Danehof event, which is on an original jousting arena in front of the Royal Castle in Denmark. Such a lovely show. We've been doing it for well over a decade now, and it's really lovely to be back. So that's going to be fun. And then we also do a show here on the 1st of June here in my home village in Laugreuden, up the hill at the castle, where we have guests from the United States and all over Germany as well, and Czech Republic. And actually a fairly large bunch where we're doing melee and we're doing jousting and really trying to meet up and do that here in my hometown on the 1st of June. And then the big one also is in Switzerland, in Gießen, in August, end of August, where we're doing historical solid lance jousting and melee under the Swiss mountains. And that's another one that we're doing this year. So we're actually jousting a fair bit this year.
Very good. Well, hopefully some of the listeners will be able to go to some of those shows and see the real thing. We're going to switch topics here because, of course, we have to talk about this Feldlager. So I can try to explain what it is, probably poorly. Why don't you, Arna, explain what exactly is the Feldlager event and how did it come about?
So the Feldlager event is where we have a field camp. Veldlager is just German for field camp. So we have a reenactment camp, but there's no audience, and we set up fights in the countryside. We have a castle ruin to actually besiege. That's one of the various parts of all the fights that we're doing, and it's basically based around the idea of a feudal war between two feudal lords. So it's relatively small, only a few hundred fighters. That is sort of just about the bottom end of those kind of wars. And we are doing maneuvers in the fields. So we tend to call this a 15th century milsim. So it is uh, an open-ended, no audience immersive because it's historical, but it is an exercise of how to understand maneuvers with military units, different types of military units of the time, and how they interact and how you can jockey for position in the countryside and things like that. So it's like live action wargaming, basically, but very immersive. So we tend historically, we dress historically, we equip historically. We have a historical ratio of crossbowmen and poleaxe fighters and pikemen and riders, and also of the riders, a fairly historical ratio of amount of armor on the riders and things like that. Historical saddles. And even we try to moderately historically even keep the horses in the camp. So, and then we besiege the castle as well, where we put gates into has doors in the gates that we actually destroy, and have ladders that we go over the walls of an actual castle to assault it, and there's things like that.
Well, certainly I can say it is a fabulous event that I was able to take part in last year. I was happy to be there. But of course, why are we talking about it? For the horse bit. So, as you alluded to, there's both infantry units, people on foot, and there's cavalry units, quite large groups of cavalry. And certainly for me, it was quite an experience learning how to kind of move with a unit that large, and just the logistics of having that many people and that many horses and armor, and attending to all of their needs and trying to complete the objectives at the same time. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what are some things you've perhaps learned or thought more about now that you've had these opportunities to lead a pretty sizable group of cavalry?
There's so many things. Now, one of the things that I found really interesting with the Feldlager, we now had 37 cavalry in actual practice that we actually fielded. And for instance, making sure everybody's on horse at the same time can be quite tricky because all the horses need to be groomed and saddled. And then if you're putting a chaffron on a horse, you can't just walk away because they're going to hook it onto the stable and hurt themselves. And there's a whole logistic of how the order goes. When do I put my armor on? When I put my horse's equipment on, how do I get on the horse? How do everybody else get on the horse? How do I get a lance? How do we then move into units? How do I find my next door neighbor in the unit? How do we then get out of the camp and get to where we need to be? How do we know where that is? So this had a lot to do with trumpets and things like that you have some control and you have some agreements on how to do this. And it went far smoother than I thought it would go. It was remarkable how much people were managing to be on time, be on their horses, and how much a relatively small support crew, really a lot smaller than we're used to per head, managed to get everybody on horses. And then a lot of these people that were grooming for someone else threw on their own armor completely by themselves and hopped on their horse and just joined in at the end of the line. And you kind of go, that takes some doing. And so that was really impressive. And then you need to get all these people up the hill through these tiny little paths that are very slippery. And then the first horse is okay, but the 30th horse it's slippier by that point. And then we get them up there, and then you have this pony power. How long do you want to sit on a horse in armor on a hill cantering around? There is a limit. And when you have 36 horses, each horse has a different limit. And you need to get all these horses back to camp before they reach this limit. So the lowest limit of the whole group is the limit for pretty much everybody. And you could send somebody back if they have an issue, maybe one or two, but even that is complicated. And so you have this dichotomy in a military sense. Like you could be the tanks of the Middle Ages, or you could be the Air Force of the Middle Ages, and you're sort of batting back and forth. You would like to tank the corner, but you're burning up your pony power, and you might need to go home. And then suddenly, bye bye nights, infantry's by themselves, and that's a lot more like the loiter time of an aircraft in modern warfare. That you're there, you have this power, you have the ability to hit something really hard if it's there, and if not, oh, I'm going home now. The loiter time of a close support aircraft or something like that.
Right. So similarly, there has to be enough gas in the tank that the whole group can get safely and timely away from the encounter
Yeah.
at the end.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I certainly, my group saw that as well. So we were in kind of opposite sides, opposite teams for the event. And my cavalry team at one point, we'd gotten off of our horses, sort of rested them, and then gotten back on. And it was another thing entirely to get back on the horse in armor with all, get everyone organized when we were no longer in the camp, right? And it certainly made me think about, say, like Pietro Monti, who talks about this importance of, oh, you should have like a wooden horse, at your house that you jump on all the time because you need to practice this in case in your armor you need to get on and off your horse. And it's like, oh, that seems like a really good idea right about now.
Yeah.
Like maybe that wasn't a joke.
Yeah, being able to get on your horse, and also you can get stuck on the saddle with your armor. I mean, if it goes wrong, it goes very wrong.
Right. And when there's not other people around you, other ground crew to help you with that can become very dangerous very quickly.
Yeah, there's a lot of things about events like that that can be extremely dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. So you need to pool your resources. You need to make sure that you look after each other, and thereby look after the horses in particular, and make sure that those dangers don't occur. How do you make sure that people don't fall off? How do you make sure that people don't get snagged with their armor on their saddle? How do you make sure that when you ride horses close together, that you don't hook your reins onto the arm harness of your next door neighbor? Those are things you need to consider. So if you know what you're doing, it is really good fun.
Right. And, on that note, for someone who is interested in, maybe they're even going to put together their own mini Feldlager somewhere else, it can be intimidating, I think, for a horse owner to think that they're going to bring their horse to this event and saying, well, this is so different from what my horse normally does, whether it's jousting or working equitation or something. So how do you get a horse to the point where they're going to be successful in an environment like that?
Oh god, that's quite a process, because you need to have a lot of hacking experience in the horse, because a lot of it was hacking in armor, and fairly hardcore hacking. So on slopes and slippery places, and boar in the bushes that they smell, and all those things also are part of the horse's um, job, and just cardiovascular conditioning. They need to get up that hill and down that hill, and just have the oomph to go. So a lot of it is hacking, and being able to hack in a group. So when people hack, often you go nose to tail, and if you canter, you canter nose to tail on a mountain path. What about side to side? What if you're stirrup to stirrup and go like open field? We're going to canter and we're going to not bolt. That is something you need to train a horse for. So you use experienced horses and less experienced horses to kind of get them all the idea of what are we going to do if we're next to each other. Is this a race? No, no, no. This is keeping the line and going relatively sedate. And then once the horses get the game, they start helping you out with that. Now, and of course, the other thing is being able to have all the equipment, all the armor on the horse, going at another horse, and then that the horse knows where to go, so that they won't crash, but they don't fear that they might crash. They want them to enjoy surging toward the other unit and being able to engage with that other unit, and ride like a wedge through their unit or something like that. The horses need to get the game, so you need to introduce them to it, so they all feel comfortable with it, and that they start having fun with that. And then they need to have not too much fun, And so there's all these elements to that. And one of the main things I think is important is, don't think you can make a list of every single thing the horse needs to be desensitized to and then work off the list. The list is far too long and you will never ever finish it. You need to get the horse to a point by their desensitization work that they trust you enough that the new thing that they've never seen before is fine because the rider says so, and that they can trust you in innately far more deeply, so that it doesn't matter that they've never ever seen this before. And that is where you want to get to. And then we're getting to that point where you can put each hoof everywhere. If you have a bunch of horses interspersed in a unit that really go that, like the Centaur, it doesn't matter that there's a helicopter landing next to them all of a sudden. It doesn't matter. You just ride them. And then the other horses that are a bit overwhelmed by the situation, they hold on to the belief, well, that horse is fine. They know what they're doing. So I'm going to herd with them and it's all going to be fine. And then you can give all these animals this experience of stepping up to the plate. And then they grow to their assignment, and they grow in their confidence in themselves and their riders and the other horses and the herd as a group. And that is the key thing, that you are able to make that happen when it matters.
I love that. That's great. So really emphasizing the overall trust between horse and rider, confidence on the horse's part, right? That they encounter new situations and they're listening and willing to, give it their best shot.
Mm-hmm.
And especially that point, about no matter what you desensitize your horse to, there's always going to be something else, right? It's the joke about, oh, well, I desensitized him to white plastic bags, but not yellow plastic bags, right? So, now in the 20 by 60 meter arena on my dressage test, up, it's all over, right? Because the flowers are the wrong color or something. There's always going to be something else, and it's
Yeah.
about learning how to work with the horse through that fear and stay in control and relaxed and etc. Oh, that's fabulous. Any future cavalry goals for Feldlager?
We were just starting to talk with the organization about what about next time. There's a few ideas for the infantry side of things, but the cavalry goals, I want to have tighter formations. I wanna improve some dressage parts. It's very complicated, but to be able to do some more intricate maneuvers. We were very um, I was very happy how it went, but there's like, I want to tighten the formations and really push one through another in an open field. And where you do wedge formations into a line formation, things like that, and echelon hits and hitting two units together and really fencing with the lances and things like that. And of course, the other thing is cavalry versus infantry. We mostly targeted the cavalry, which is very historical. Like, that's your biggest threat, and it's the thing where you can do the most. And then by the time you've beaten those off, well, then the battle's over anyway. So, so we've done our job now. But it is of course nice. So a few of us took it upon ourselves to ride through the pike blocks and stuff like that. Like, I don't know whether you saw Isak go in, and he did this fancy move with his lance and carried a bunch of pikes over his head and rode his horse underneath them right through the unit. And I would like to do that with a unit of riders. And I have one experiment that I want to do, really frontally go through a pike block, because I've seen it done, I have it done, I've taught people how to do it, but I want to do it with all the gear and a slightly larger unit and a larger pike block, and really, really understand those interactions of different units hitting each other. And so that's an ambition. Knee in knee, not just stirrup to stirrup.
Right. Oh, very good. Hopefully that will materialize. You did lead on to my next question there when you mentioned the gear. So, you were um, one of a very, 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 very small micro number of people who have full metal armor for their horse.
Mm-hmm.
So, obviously, that's not something that many of us have gotten to experience. First question: who made the horse armor, and how heavy is it?
So, of course, it's modular, so that's always a bit complicated. The horse armor, most of it was made by Isak Klok, who was a student who lived at my house, and he basically made it as a gift for thanking me for being here for that time and getting in a stallion and stuff like that. But the head and neck part, the Chanfron Criniette, was actually something I already had, and that was made by Roman Tereshenko in Crimea, at the time still Ukraine. And he made that, and he made it, of course, sight unseen with the horse. So it had needed some adjustments, and various armors. Lars was involved, and Isaac again adjusted that. Not of any of Roman's fault at all. He did a marvelous job, but of course, because I got him a shape which was slightly off, I didn't mold it properly. He executed what I gave him very, very well, and so that needed some adjustment. So it was a whole process. So yeah, it's mostly Isaac Cook did the lion's share of the work, and he had various other armors help him. And it is original weight, and by and large, it weighs 20 kilos. But you can very easily modify how much you put on the horse. So, for instance, the criniette, which is the neck armor, is actually a really big chunk. So you can just take it off. The moment you take that off, you take 6 kilos off. It's quite a lot. So it depends a bit on how much armor I put on myself, how much I want to put on my horse. So I can just kind of adjust it so that it's just right. And also what we're going to do. So if it's a very hard day of riding, I might put less armor on the horse, and it's very modular. So the full armor is 20 kilos, and so it's still including the saddle and the bridle and the bit and all my equipment, all my weapons, all my clothes, the saddle cloth, everything together. If I put everything on I possibly could, and I make the very heaviest setup, then that is 24% of the horse's weight. So that is really right on the edge, right on the edge. So I very rarely do that.
Right.
Usually it takes a module off.
Yeah. It's sort of, I know before you've used the analogy of it's like running a marathon, right? Where you don't run a marathon every day, you train for it, and then when the day is there, you execute it, right? And then you take a rest after. So it's,
Yeah,
it's not, it sounds like a great deal of weight, but this is a very high level horse
yeah,
trained to carry himself and you appropriately.
yeah,
And the armor goes on only once the horse is trained at that level where
absolutely.
they can do it.
Yeah, it's really important because of course you train the horse on a daily basis with far less weight than that, and then the horse learns an outline, and then it's like if you go into the gym, you lift a lot of weight. If you buy a bag of oats or something, there's a limit to what they're allowed to sell you, the weight of the bag that somebody can just casually lift. But if you go to the gym, you lift way more than that limit, way more. And that's because you make a point of doing it with a technique, with a posture, and that you've built yourself up to that point. Now the same goes for horses when it comes to this armor. So yeah, absolutely, it is not something to be taken lightly, uh, pun intended. But it is also something you can actually adjust, and you can see that the horse is okay with it. So it's again one of these things that when I started experimenting with this, because this is not done a lot, I had a bunch of vets. I had footage, and I wanted to know what the gait was doing. So, is there any signs of discomfort that we can analyze and things like that? And at the beginning of the ride and at the end of the ride, the horse come back as good as he went away, and things like that. So I actually had several second opinions on this, and I wanted to know, like, okay, am I ever going to do that again? Because if this horse doesn't like it, then I might not. And it's not just my gut feeling. No, I want to know if there's a scientific basis of this, and I got a pretty good record of that. And then tried it again, and then it was actually even better. So the horse is actually functioning under that load very, very well because it's prepared, because it's in an outline, because it knows its job, and because it has the opportunity to rest in between.
Very good. Last couple questions as we wrap up here. How this is sounds like a very general question, but in your mind, how do dressage and mounted combat relate to each other? We know dressage is very helpful for mounted combat, and you sort of need it to do it well. Um, but is the reverse true? Like, do you think uh, mounted combat can influence or inform your dressage?
Oh, absolutely, the reverse is true. Um, one of these things is that, for instance, I'll just segue a little bit into a mention, paraphrasing from the old masters, where they say, like, when you have a school horse that just needs to perform its airs in the manege, then you can use various different techniques to make them just eke the best out of the horse. Eh? You use your crops and your punishments and your bits and things like that. However, but some of these things you don't want to use in a war horse, heaven forbid, because when it comes to it, you'll never be as scary as war, so the horse will just defy you and you will die. And so people already understood this distinction, that if you have to do sword fighting on horseback, some techniques will stop working, some artificial techniques, if you may say so. So, for instance, too much rein use, you start having a very different idea of what rein use, too much rein use means, and just how little you need to perform in a mounted combat. You need to be able to control a horse at very short notice. Sometimes, when you do a dressage performance, months in advance exactly how many steps you're going to do of what. So the horse can learn it by heart. Whereas in a mounted combat situation, everything changes completely organically, and you need to be able to deal with it here and now, and the horse needs to be really with you to a very different level, which is difficult to express when you've never experienced it. And on a similar note, you start noticing why you want collection, and then the distinction between, people say true collection and untrue collection. Well, the collection has a purpose, so that means that if it's not true, it's just not there. It's really obvious what collection starts meaning, and that means that you understand a great deal more about how to do it. And also, the other thing is, you need to do this one-handed or none-handed. You drop your reins all the time because you're doing a wrestling move. So you need to be able to be very independent of your reins, right? Mostly from your seat. And you need to be able to do something else that doesn't interfere with it either. This means that you become able to do these things with less forcible means, because you literally just throw them out of the window for practical reasons. And it, on by the book, if you do full on mounted combat, if you do that at the highest level, you want to at least be able to do counter pirouettes, flying lead changes, and stuff like that, and often actually well beyond that into the high school. If you can do backwards canter, for instance, is very useful if you can use it in time when you want it to sword fight with. That takes some doing. Or terre à terre, misère, courbette, and things like that most people don't even know about. Mounted fencing thereby makes you understand how a horse functions, the biomechanical function, how to set what a transition even means becomes different to a mounted fencer. Your interaction with the horse in a biomechanical sense, how much you're intertwined as a biomechanical system with your horse, just how closely they mirror your muscular activity, how much you need to use muscles deliberately that a lot of people you would, but most people don't even know they have. I think, it's eye-opening to most people that try it, as far as the dressage is concerned, even if it's just as a little experiment on the side and then go back to their main core thing as dressage. I think it is very interesting.
That's a great answer. Last question. Since you do get to spend so much time teaching a variety of horse riders, sort of mounted combat, Rossfechten, these things, is there anything in particular, in general, you see people struggle with, like quite often, that you feel like you could give us some advice for, or things that you feel like people are commonly getting wrong that you find yourself, over and over correcting?
Um, I suppose it's two things that come into one, and this is from a theorist. You obviously are intimately familiar with the concept of the volta stabile, the positioning of the hip joints to stack the whole body, including the shoulders and spine, into a stable twist. I suppose volta stabile. I suppose that's how you could say it, and of course from your professional life, you obviously know the importance of that on the biomechanical function of the human being. And this volta stabile segues into the ribcage rotation upwards on the inside of the bend of a relatively elevated and at least moderately collected horse. These two things go together. They help one another, they encourage one another, they instill one another. So if you can teach somebody to ride the horse from the seat into the bend, into the relative elevation at the same time by means of the volta stabile in their body, and then they put themselves into that famous classical position by that token, and then the horse can lift its withers, use its shoulder blades to use the shoulder sling to lift itself, to engage the whole pelvis and thereby the haunches, and use the impulse of the hind legs to exert itself over the entire movement of the horse. Those things are basically based on the rider doing the volta stabile and thereby becoming independent on the rein. To put everything in a nutshell.
I like it. It's all about the volta stabile.
Absolutely.
We heard it. Very good. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. So thank you, Arne, so much for doing this interview with us. Hopefully, there will be another time in the future where we can get into all sorts of other things. However, that's it for now. For more information about Arne, please take a look at the show notes where you'll find links to his website and Facebook page, as well as information on the Feldlager event we discussed. For more episodes and content, you can visit our website, www.scalaequestris.com. We'd love to hear from you, who you want to see interviewed next, and any other suggestions for content. So see you next time, where we'll be talking to Mike Camphor about medieval horse feeding and the Iberian horse in England.